Have you ever looked at your paycheck and wondered where all that money went? Taxes, right? It feels like they've been around forever, and in a way, they have. But you know what else has been around forever? People trying not to pay them. Today, we're traveling back in time, over 5,000 years ago, to ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, to uncover the story of the world's very first tax evasion. It's hard to imagine, but the bustling cities of Sumer, like Uruk and Uar, were some of the first places to have organized government, writing, and yes, taxes. The center of life in these cities was the temple. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was the administrative heart, the central bank, and the biggest landlord all rolled into one. The temple owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of people, and managed massive granaries and storehouses. To keep this whole system running, the temple priests, who were basically the government officials of the day, needed resources. So, they levied taxes on everyone. Farmers had to give a portion of their harvest, like barley and wheat. Herders gave up some of their livestock. And merchants, who were the lifeblood of Mesopotamian trade, had to pay taxes on their goods, especially on valuable commodities like silver, copper, and timber. These taxes were recorded on clay tablets using a new invention called cuneiform, the world's first writing system. You could say that the first thing humanity decided to write down was "you owe me." Temple scribes would meticulously press wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, detailing who owed what and how much. These weren't just simple IOUs. They were complex legal documents, the ancient equivalent of a tax return. Now, let's meet our ancient entrepreneurs, the merchants. These guys were the globetrotters of their time. They'd organize long, dangerous caravan journeys, traveling hundreds, even thousands of miles to trade Mesopotamian grain and textiles for precious metals from Anatolia, rare stones from Afghanistan, and cedarwood from Lebanon. It was a high-risk, high-reward business. They had to deal with bandits, harsh deserts, and political instability. The last thing they wanted after all that trouble was to hand over a huge chunk of their hard-earned silver to the temple tax collector. So, they got creative. This is where we see the birth of tax evasion. How did they do it? Well, they couldn't exactly set up an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They had to be much more direct. The most common method was simple underreporting. A merchant might return from a trading expedition with, say, 100 silver shekels. When the temple scribe came around, the merchant would swear on the gods that he only made 50. Since the scribe wasn't on the caravan, how could he prove otherwise? It was the merchant's word against the records he chose to create. Another clever trick involved bartering and creating complex, off-the-books transactions. The official economy, the one the temple taxed, was based on fixed amounts of grain and silver. But merchants could operate in a shadow economy. Imagine two merchants agreeing to a deal. Instead of recording a direct sale of 10 goats for 20 shekels of silver, they might create a convoluted series of exchanges. Maybe one merchant gifts the other some wool, who in turn lends him some pottery, which is then traded for the goats with a third party. The final transaction is never recorded as a simple, taxable sale. They created a web of transactions so tangled that it would be a nightmare for any temple accountant to unravel. It was the ancient version of creative accounting. They also used a system of debt and credit to their advantage. A merchant could sell goods on credit and keep the debt off the official clay tablets. The payment would be collected later, in a private transaction, far from the prying eyes of the taxman. This way, the initial profit was never officially realized, and therefore never taxed. They were essentially deferring their income indefinitely. But why did they go to such lengths? It wasn't just about greed. For many merchants, it was about survival. The temple's tax rates could be cripplingly high. A bad harvest or a lost caravan could spell ruin, and a heavy tax bill on top of that could push a family into debt slavery. Hiding some of their assets was a way of building a personal safety net, a secret stash of silver buried under the floorboards for a rainy day. It was a rational response to an oppressive system. Of course, the temple authorities weren't stupid. They knew people were trying to cheat the system. So, they developed countermeasures. They employed teams of inspectors and scribes whose job was to audit accounts and verify shipments. They introduced standardized weights and measures to prevent merchants from using dodgy scales. They also made people swear powerful oaths in the name of the city's patron god. Lying after swearing such an oath was a grave sin, believed to bring divine punishment upon you and your family. For many, the fear of an angry god was a more powerful deterrent than the fear of a temple audit. Archaeologists have found clay tablets that are essentially ancient court records, detailing disputes over taxes. We have records of merchants being accused of hiding assets and being dragged before a council of elders to defend themselves. The penalties for getting caught could be severe: massive fines, confiscation of all your property, and even being sold into servitude. The game of cat and mouse between the taxpayer and the tax collector is as old as civilization itself. One of the most fascinating pieces of evidence comes from what archaeologists call private archives. These were collections of clay tablets found in the ruins of merchants' homes, not in the official temple archives. These private tablets tell a different story. They record all the secret deals, the hidden debts, and the real profits. They were the merchants' secret set of books. Finding one of these is like finding a hidden ledger that reveals the true scale of their operations. It shows a clear and deliberate separation between their public, taxable business and their private, untaxed wealth. So, what does this ancient story tell us? It shows that the fundamental struggle between the state's need for revenue and the individual's desire to keep their wealth is a core part of human history. The complex systems of finance, law, and accounting we have today didn't just appear out of nowhere. They evolved over thousands of years, partly in response to this timeless battle. The Mesopotamian merchant who buried a few silver rings in his garden and the modern billionaire who uses a labyrinth of shell corporations are connected by the same basic human impulse. The next time you grumble about filing your taxes, just remember, you're participating in a tradition that's over 5,000 years old. And so is the temptation to find a little loophole. The tools have changed from clay tablets to computer software, but the game remains the same. The world's first civilization gave us cities, writing, and the wheel, but it also gave us the taxman and the clever people who would do anything to avoid him. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this interesting, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. See you next time.